Okay, well, um, I'm going to introduce a woman that needs no introduction, HollyShimizu. She's been a fixture in the DC area for years. She's a drop dead first rank plants woman. And also, of course, is married to Bevan Shimizu, who is, is Osamu Shimizu, who is Japanese. So she gets to go over to Japan with, as it were, a built-in guide slash translator. And that's perfect for this talk coming up. And I'm so happy because I've heard her speak before on several subjects, and she's an absolutely wonderful speaker. And with that, I'm just going to leave it at that before I stuff my other foot in my mouth. Bevan, by the way, is her son.
Thank you. Great. Well, thanks everybody for being here. And I loved going to Japan. I've also been several times with American Horticulture Society, leading tours. I'm not really leading the tours, but part of the tours. And Bevan has lived there. So we have a long history of going to Japan, and Osamu's a garden designer. So I've been able to see and understand things through his eyes, as well as many of the other people that we've come in contact with. So I'm hoping to just give you a feeling of the Japanese garden, why they're different, how they're distinctive, things about them that are particularly interesting to me. And they tend to be grouped by place. I did send Olivia a handout, which in case you want that could be helpful if you're interested in the details, like the name of the garden or the location or anything like that. I'm not going to read my images. I put some text on them, but not because I read them, because I don't like doing that. So I'm going to really focus on this, partly the spirit of a Japanese garden and some of the distinctive aspects like hide and reveal, borrowed symmetry. And I'll talk about wabi-sabi also, which I love, and I want you to think about too as I discuss it. So let's see, I'm trying to make my images go down, Olivia, and my down arrow isn't seeming to make them go down. Let me try something else. Do you know another way to make them go down?
Just hit the page down key, and sometimes that works better.
Okay, all right. Let's see. It'd be nice if I could find a page down key. Let's see.
I think you're on a Mac, and my technical support for Macs is not very
I'm
good.
on a Mac.
Yeah, I'm not good with technical support for a Mac.
Oh, okay. Does anyone know where page down is?
Isn't there a down arrow?
Yeah, that's what I'm pushing, but it's not doing it. Can you maybe switch the screen?
Try hitting the space bar.
I can see her arrow. This is a Mac problem. I can't help.
The keyboard's almost identical in the Mac. Right?
But she's got the pointer it's working as a pointer, not as a. Her mouse is working as a pointer, not as a.
No, but on the keyboard it should be up towards the right somewhere. I think.
Let's see.
On my Mac, it's at the right lower corner of my keyboard. There are 4 arrows, up, down, and left and right.
Yeah, see, I have those, but they're not allowing it to go down.
Okay.
Olivia, can you make it go down for me then?
I do not have that power, but it looks like you can push the right arrow button that popped up on the bottom left of your screen, and that might work.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Ah,
Did that work?
Oh, okay. You got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so Japan is really a country of islands. It's the shape of a banana, and it, you know, there are 4 main islands, and you know, the top Hokkaido, and then the biggest one is Honshu. Lower is Shikoku and Kyushu, and then the inland seas go in. And I'll show you an example of that. Let's see. Okay, hold on. good, we'll get this. So that's a very typical view of the inland seas. This, having traveled a lot in Japan, this is really, really typical. And it's funny, they don't tend to be people who vacation a lot or, you know, have these second houses and all the stuff that's quite typical in America. So, you know, a lot of these places are just, they're just there. I mean, they just don't have this idea, but they're, people don't live in isolated areas in Japan. They tend to always live in clusters, in towns or cities. So the range, the weather range, you know, in northern Japan and Hokkaido, it's mountainous and cold, and, you know, that's where the Winter Olympics were. And in southern Japan, you, it's subtropical. It's like South Florida, and so you have this whole range of plants that really grow in Japan. Some of the earliest people are called Jomon, and they, you know, were tribal, and they they hunted and gathered, and they lived in small buildings like this one and with thatch. And it's interesting, they cultivated some of the plants that we grow. I mean, I don't grow all of these, but I use all of them, perilla and burdock. I eat burdock, which is Arctium Japanese cultivar, which is, you know, that long root. So as time passed, they started, you know, they kept those thatch roofs. This is sort of a Japanese Williamsburg version, and they kept those thatch roofs, but it's really hard now because you almost can't find people to repair them or create them. It's like so many of the older ways that are really fading out, but it's typical to see rice like this throughout so much of Japan, rice and cultivation. So Shinto is important in the way the gardens evolve because it is a spiritual way that worships nature. It's really a belief in nature worship. And so many of the beautiful things in nature are sacred, like beautiful stones and waterfalls. And there's really sort of a God in everything in Shinto. It's very accepting. It doesn't reject other ways of thinking. So we were walking through a little town and we came upon a Shinto shrine, and they had just brought a child in who was there to be introduced to the gods. And here, this was it. They're introducing the baby. Oh, so anyway, I don't know what happened there, but oh, there we go. So anyway, that is very typical that you take for special things, you go to the shrine and they introduce you to the gods. It isn't so much a religion, honestly. It's a belief, it's a spiritualism, but it's not so much a religion. So the Torii Gate is something that is really significant in as much as it connects the real world with the spiritual world. And so you often see Torii gates at the entrance to Shinto shrines. So this is quite typical. We saw this walking through a lot of towns where you knew this is a place that you go through the gate and you could pray, you could give offerings, you could be thankful. And so that's why it really does have a significance. Places of real, very important sort of spiritual experience. Here is a mountaintop. It's Kumano Sanzo, and the waterfall is this particular, I mean, all of them are really considered to be a dignitary of nature, really the spirits are living there. And when you see the water like this at the entrance to gardens and temples and shrines, the purpose is to cleanse oneself before you go into the garden. And this was done in anticipation of the arrival of the spirits. So this you see is typical. This is considered a sacred tree, and that's why the rope is wrapped around it. And here's a sacred waterfall with the rope, which signifies it. And here are sacred rocks, and some believe that this is where some of the spirits of Shinto reside. So it wasn't really until the 6th and 7th century that Japanese gardens became artistic with the influence from China and Korea. And this is really important because we give so much attention to Japanese arts of ikebana and bonsai and gardens, but they really were hugely influenced by China and Korea. But the reason that we think of them, perceive them as strictly Japanese is because Japan was closed for 300 years, closed to outsiders. And over that time, Japanese culture and designers developed their own sense of design, but it was with all the influences from China and Korea. So, I mean, it's important to me. I remember one year at the Botanic Garden, we had an ikebana show, and someone came in from like Korea and said, this isn't Japanese, it's Korean. And, you know, so I consider it an important thing to really recognize and acknowledge. And so here's the Wu Bridge, which is something that was brought from China and Korea, and the early designers came to Japan around in the 600s and worked for the Japanese nobles and started building gardens. And so the little bridge is, it's obviously just an influence on a smaller scale of the large Wu Bridge. So as Buddhism spread through Japan, and because Shintoism said, welcome Buddhism, we welcome you. And so Buddhism now and Shintoism are intertwined. And so in today's world, most Japanese are Shinto Buddhist, and that's true for Osamu's family. And they don't separate it. And in the gardens, we're not going to separate them because, again, they're really very intertwined. And a lot of the, the temples and shrines are blended. They're not all blended, but it's okay. They don't seem to need to make a distinction. So the stone is so important. And oftentimes you see them almost always in an irregular triangle and in asymmetric designs. And the raking that you see, well, that varies very much depending on the monk who is having to rake it each day. And there is some symbolism, and it's, people can argue about it, but generally in this example, the white is symbolic of the ocean, with then the land coming up, rising out of the sea. And it's a viewing garden from a temple. And it's very typical. It would be a place where one would contemplate and pray, or just, have a feeling of being with nature. And this is, I found this to be just incredible. Mysterious valleys. I mean, look at the rock. It's amazing, but I do know that you can't find these rocks today because they've been so valued historically in Japan that really, I think most of them are utilized. And so like this big rock that you see here, that would be worth a fortune if one was to buy it today. I mean, they value this so much. a way to really kind of show a forest or to represent a forest would be with moss and then beautiful trunks. And this is really typical. And I love the moss. It's so rich. It's so green, but it is high maintenance. And I speak, from experience. We have one, and you have to hand weed it. And you often see in Japan, you see older ladies squatting, picking weeds all day long. And that's their job in the temple garden. So there's a kind of garden in Japan which is called a stroll garden, and it's called that because you walk around the big water body, and in doing that you go through a series of experiences. So I'm going to show you Kenro Kuen Garden, and it has the typical features of a tea house, large ponds, hills, but it's distinctive. This lantern is one of a kind because it has one leg on earth and one leg in the water. So Kenro Kuen was a typical feudal lord garden because what would happen is that when special guests would come, they could walk the garden, walk and talk, and go through all of the different experiences that the garden offered. And so it has what the Japanese describe as the 6 most important qualities of a garden: extensiveness, imagination, antiquity, abundant water, wide prospect, and quiet seclusion. And those last 2 remind me of things that we in our garden design are so important, where you go from, a big space with an open view, and then you go into a small intimate space, and the contrast of experiences make for a really interesting garden experience. Happened to be there on a day when they were pruning the Japanese red pines, and they do this on each tree every 3 years, and they do it by hand by cutting the candles. And it's really an important thing in Japan. So you go from a tree that hasn't been pruned to a tree that is considered artful. And it's been fully pruned, and to me, it looks more like a bonsai. And it's funny, in Japan, when you're driving through a neighborhood, if someone's home garden has pines that aren't pruned, you go, oh, they must be having problems. Oh, they must be low on money. But if your pines are all pruned, then that means you're in good shape. It's kind of like, in America, you might drive a Mercedes if you wanted to show off that you were, rich, but in Japan, you would prune your pines. And if you're in the north in the cold, you would protect your pines because you love them so much. You would not want them to break because you prune them so carefully, so thoughtfully, as if they were wind-blown in nature. So in contrast to the large stroll garden, now I want to take you to one that I really love. It's a small garden. It's a home garden. It is very historic, though. It was the home garden of samurai. It's the Nomura family. And this is the entrance. And notice the stone. I mean, you kind of can't believe how beautiful the stonework is, and how important that is to the year-round beauty of the garden.
Yeah.
At the entrance to the samurai garden is a beautiful scene. And this scene, if you think about this, it's been beautiful like this for more than 300 years. So in order to keep it the way the designer intended, you really have to prune it, prune and prune and prune. And the rock to me, this rock is so beautiful. I think it has wabi-sabi, a timeless beauty. So I will explain that more as we go along, but I just love this entrance. And then you go in through the house, and it is a courtyard garden. It's in the Enshu style. It's very much a historic style of Japanese gardens that are intimate spaces and done so that there are a lot of different views. But it's shocking, this garden is so small. It's about 50 feet by 80 feet, and yet it's designed so that it doesn't feel small. And so, and you have beautiful views from all aspects of the house. And so I love this. This is what you see, one of the great views. So imagine if you had this in an American garden, and what would you do? You wouldn't have any handrails. You'd have lawsuits going crazy. So they can't ruin their garden designs by not, by putting in handrails. So it's just part of the beauty is kind of pretending that it's nature and kind of, you know, creating nature, but in small and requiring so much pruning. So we're going to see another Enshu garden, but this is a wonderful one for a kind of home garden. And they're characterized by graceful simplicity and peacefulness. And I know that it offered that. We all felt that when we were there. And it's just lots of places to sit and contemplate and have that peaceful feeling. And so lots of pruning every year. The zigzag bridge is in the garden to prevent evil from entering the house. That's why it's zigzag. And these have gotten pretty popular, but they are typical in a Japanese garden to slow the water down as it's coming from the gutter. Nearby is the town of Kanazawa, and this is the geisha district. And it's not done this way for tourists. This is actually real. And so it's still a geisha district. And I noticed walking down the street, you could hear the music, you could hear they were being taught how to play various instruments because entertainment is what they do. And then here is water on both sides of the street moving through gravity. So this has a contemporary design, but the surrounding is more of a historic traditional, but this is a museum to honor the very famous Buddhist philosopher Suzuki. And he had so many great writings and huge following. And my favorite is this quote. He said, "The truth of Zen, just a little bit of it, is what turns one's humdrum life, a life of monotonous, uninspiring commonplaces, into one of art full of genuine inner creativity." Around the museum, they have beautiful pathways. And so even if you're making a straight pathway, I think the stone pattern is such a great way to make it interesting. It's not hard to do, and it makes it just an object of year-round beauty. So I think it's such a good idea. So here we have also at the same garden, the Tsukubai, which we saw before, but this is the place for cleansing. And you will see that in almost all the traditional gardens in your purifying.
is the pile on the right.
Sorry? Oh, so that if any garden with natural running water is very lucky, and it allows for, the clean water and beautiful natural landscape, and they have that there. So now we're going to the garden of, I can't talk, the Shrunken Scenery Garden, which was very beautiful. It was destroyed in 1945, but it was rebuilt. And it is designed to be a series of nature scenes done in miniature. Japanese people love miniature, and so you move around the garden, but you come upon these small scenes. This to me is stunning, and I can tell you why I think it is so beautiful. It is the movement and the curves, and it's like music to me. It just kind of moves you through this garden and in such beauty. And notice that there are no flowers. They're just beautiful plants, leaves, looks like Ligularia or Farfugium. I can never remember which is the more recent name. And, just who doesn't want to walk on that path? It's so beautiful. So little scenery and bridges, lots of bridges in Japanese gardens, because they are thought to take you from a world of humanness into a world of spirits. And so they're considered to have that job in a garden, in a place. And so you can see some little shrunken scenery. And here's an example of a shrunken little island with pines pruned to miniatures. And it's a charming, charming garden with plants protected in such a way that I think it's really beautiful. They use rice straw to protect the cycads so that they don't get killed during the winter. So I used to protect my plants with hideous sheets of styrofoam. So I really appreciate this. It's a lot more attractive and a lot less wasteful. So now I want to take you to a bonsai museum. It's also a nursery and a garden, and it's in Tokyo. And wow, it's really, really active. And here is the master. His name is Kunio Kobayashi. And Japanese are known to have masters of many of their fine arts, like, ceramic and garden design and all kinds of wonderful arts. And so he's the bonsai master, and he hires people, young people, to come work there, but he is a master. And so that means he'll go, rah, 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 rah. He'll yell at you and you go, yes, sir, and you do it. And you don't ever argue and you don't ask questions, you just do it. So it's funny, if you know any students who work in Japan, they kind of went into shock a little bit when they learned their reality. But anyway, that's how he was. I watched him in action with some of his students. But they end up with a good training and they take it and usually do something wonderful with it. Bonsai is big business for him because he can rent these out for special events and weddings and all sorts of things for lots and lots of money, and he can sell them, he can buy and sell. And this allows him to, create this museum and invite guests in. I asked him, what do you think what is the most important thing for taking care of bonsai? And he said, oh, it's very clear. It's love. I think that might be true for a lot of things, a lot of plants, but bonsai, it's a lot of work, a lot of watering and worrying about weather and so forth, but he has lots of good helpers. And So many, kinds of bonsais and lots of interesting things in the museum. And this is one of my favorites. This is the stone, the viewing stone. And many people felt that it has wabi-sabi. And it's really important where it's placed, how it's placed. And the fossils on this are just so beautiful. So I want to just try to describe wabi-sabi, but I'm going to preface it by saying I have a good friend in Japan who writes books about plants and really knows a lot. And I said to her, Seiko, can you explain to me what wabi-sabi is? And she said, no, I can't. I know what it is, but I can't explain it. So I preface because I'm probably going to be inadequate in describing it, but I'll try. So it's finding beauty and imperfection and depth in nature, accepting the natural cycle of growth, decay, and death. Simple, slow, uncluttered, and authentic. So, and then there are gardens that can have wabi-sabi. My view about a wabi-sabi place is one that lifts your spirit. It just changes the way you feel. And so it's something interesting to think about. And actually, my son Bevan, when he was in graduate school at GW, he did his master's thesis on wabi-sabi. And that's actually how I learned about it. And then on a recent trip in Japan, I was with other travelers and I tried to get them to think about it and see where they might experience wabi-sabi. It was hard. Not everybody was able to grasp what it is. It takes a while. So this garden had wabi-sabi for me, but this is Omotegoten, and this is the best example of a dry landscape. It's an expression of water, but there is no water in the dry landscape garden. And I think it's just incredible to me. And here's another view with a 33-foot long bridge. It's just amazing. And the stone is just so gorgeous. Here's an even better view. So it's an expression of water. And here in this image is a dry waterfall. And I find it amazing that there isn't any water there. And it's just so remarkable. So one of the people that was influenced by Omotegoten Garden is Isamu Noguchi, who I'm sure you all know who he is, very famous. He grew up in New York, but his parents are were Japanese American. And there's a museum in his honor in Shikoku, Japan. But he said the art of stone in a Japanese garden is that of placement. Its ideal does not deviate from that of nature. So one of the people who has done great work in showing through art what life was like in Japan are really the artists of the Japanese wood block prints. My favorite is Hiroshige, and I actually have one of his prints. I love the ones with snow falling, but we were lucky enough to go to his museum in Japan. You can see the Prunus mume. A lot of the old places had Japanese plum orchard and Japanese iris. So it's really beautiful artwork to me. At the museum, they have something quite interesting, which is, since they're herons and cranes that eat their fish, they have taken fishing fishing line, and they've put it above the water in these crisscrosses, and it has protected the fish. Because I've had this problem in my Glen Echo garden, because we have a beautiful great blue heron that loves to fly in for an easy breakfast. So sometimes I've had to, put this up because I want to save some of the fish. Now I want to take you to one of the most beautiful gardens. It's been described as one of the most beautiful in Japan. It's actually not old. It was started in 1970 by an art collector, but its design is based on the older traditional gardens. And it has some specific qualities that make it extraordinary. And one is the hide and reveal part, so that when you're looking at it, you really can't see everything that is in there. And so a pathway will pull you in and take you into a space that is a surprise and move you along to other surprising things. You'll get different views and a whole series of different experiences. And it's called Hide and Reveal, and they do it really well at the Adachi Gardens. In addition, they do borrowed scenery so beautifully. And so the garden is set to give you this kind of mountainous background with the garden in the foreground, and very carefully designed. It's really like, this garden is like a piece of art, really. But when I look at that white gravel, I think, oh my God, what do they do with these fallen leaves and needles and everything? Because if they stay on that white gravel, they change color. So anyway, I'm sure it's really high maintenance, but it's really quite beautiful. So my next batch of images have come from Kyoto, which, if you were only going to one part of Japan, I would say then you have to go to Kyoto, because it's just an arts and gardens and temples and cultural center. And so you realize that a lot of the principles of Japanese garden design are similar or the same for bonsai and ikebana. So we were welcomed here by this beautiful Maiko, and she's in training, and so she's just doing this beautiful dance for people, welcoming them to Kyoto. So in Kyoto, since there are so many gardens, the nurseries sell really great quality moss, but it's so important for moss to come from that region. So if you brought it from far away, chances are it wouldn't grow. And the way that you move it is you kind of use a spatula, and you spatula a piece up like a pancake. And then you take that and you don't prepare the soil, you just tamp it down. And that's really how you move moss around. So this moss is quite beautiful. It's how I see most moss gardens, with a variety of mosses. They're integrated, and it gives you a lot of seasonal variation. And they're so rich and colorful. And to me, a lot more beautiful than, say, a lawn. I think, they are high maintenance, but they're beautiful, rich. So in Kyoto, we were lucky enough to go to a very historic Japanese inn, very, very old, hundreds of years old. And the garden outside where we were eating is an enshu garden, which we saw before at the Samurai House. And it's a courtyard garden. So you look out at it all year from wherever you are in the inn. And most of the plants are evergreen because that gives it that year-round value. And this is at night. And this bamboo, that has to be redone about every three to 5 years, depending on how it goes. And as you know, the koi in Japan are quite lovely because they're really into the koi and how they look, and they breed them for their beauty. So we had a lot of unusual food when we were at the inn, and a lot of, I think there were about 12 courses. And so I get this and I'm like, I eat a lot of things, but I'm going, what is that? I have no idea what that is. But there was a lot of seaweed, a lot of wasabi, and a lot of raw seafood. Most of the women on our trip didn't want to eat raw seafood. So they all tried to sit next to Osamu because they could hand him everything raw that they didn't want. And for him, it was like being a king because you're getting the royal treatment with all this fabulous raw seafood. And so as the evening wears on, we had a geisha, but then we also had a maiko. She's a geisha in training, and this is our maiko. And everybody's been drinking and loosening up. And this would be a typical bar game that you would play. Because this is real, actually. I mean, this isn't pretend, it's real. And this is the bar game. The idea is if you can keep the pattern and not lose the movement pattern. And so she's really, really good at it. She's really been training. Osamu lost, so he's competitive. So he's thinking, oh, one more time I can win. He's sure he can win because that's the way he is. So let's see. You can't win. No, you can't win. So it was incredible, though, to actually experience that in real life. So onward to a beautiful temple and to meet this lovely monk. He's the 3rd generation monk at this particular temple. And he was so lovely. And these are the two things he kind of talked to us about, that Buddha's nature has a peaceful heart and mind. And he explained that each monk has to find enlightenment and that Buddha can be in all places. He was so lovely. And the garden, we're there in late winter, early spring. And so you can see the sukubai for cleansing. And the garden is designed for viewing. And it's about 400 years old. So here you can see a viewing of the garden that takes advantage of the borrowed scenery. And the idea really is to be able to just sit on the edge of the temple and contemplate as you look out on the garden. The tea ceremony came to Japan along with Buddhism from China and Korea. And it was initially very special. It was really just done for Buddha, and then it became something that was done for special guests and warriors, and then moved on to people. But it's really done with such extraordinary care, and it's connected to peace and harmony. And so we were able to have some of the wonderful green tea and sit and look out at the garden. Most famous garden in Japan, I think, is here, but we almost never see these other parts to it. So it's Ryoanji, but there's a beautiful temple and these gorgeous steps. And then the cherries are blooming and you can see the bridge and the long view. But this is the part that makes it so famous. And we were very lucky to get there before the crowds of people came. And so it did feel very peaceful. The white being the sea, and the rocks are all in odd numbered clusters. But as soon as the gates open, I mean, it was just like volcanoes with people coming. And so you really can't experience it as you should when there's so many people around. So we were lucky to get a few minutes of peace. And the raking is done every day and is done differently by each monk, depending on the way that they want to rake that gravel. And here's the red blooming Edgeworthia. So it's thought that in this garden, that as you look out, in front of the pond is the real world, and beyond it is the spiritual world. It's important in these viewing gardens also that you have it framed. It's kind of like a piece of artwork. And so you sit there and you're looking out through a kind of frame to meditate with the garden. So we're now in Kyoto at a temple complex. And so there are a few different temples within this complex. And the most famous garden there was designed by Mirie Shigemori, who's passed away. This is his grandson. So he took us through these gardens. And this was a controversial garden that Shigemori designed. And when he did it, his idea was to blend a Zen Buddhist Japanese garden with more contemporary art and gardens. And the Japanese traditionalists were really critical of him, saying, oh, terrible, terrible. And then Westerners traveled to Japan and they spoke highly of it. They liked it. And, you know, it got a lot of positive press. And so gradually, the Japanese said, oh, okay, well, maybe it's okay. But it took years. And I can tell you from experience living with a Japanese person, they are not open to change quickly. It takes years. I've had to work years to get Osamu to open up to new ideas and changes. So I can tell you from experience, it's a cultural thing, I think. So here, this in the same temple complex, but this is like, these oceans are rough and wild. So what was happening when that monk raked this garden? And a more small garden vignette, which was really, really so beautiful, and a small temple. And the sayings of the, see if I can read them. You can read them too, but I love his little sayings: to enjoy each moment, to be patient, to not get upset, and to be humble, and that every day is a good day. And he was just, he wasn't living, but he designed this small garden with equisetum and bamboo. And what would they do here? Oh, yeah. But they don't seem to take over as they do here in Japanese gardens. The temples are used for so many special occasions and rituals and events. And it's so beautiful the way people dress for it. I love these traditional clothes. They're beautiful. I got married in Japan and I had to wear a kimono, and my sister-in-law dressed me, but I couldn't find any shoes that fit me because I'm big. And so I had to wear men's shoes, but nobody knew. So the monks' lunch in the temple, this is what a monk eats, and because they're vegetarian. And so they eat a lot of tofu, a lot of pickles, a lot of seaweed. And the rice, I wonder if you all know what this is. It's xanthoxylum, and it's delicious. It's strong, and really, really so good. So it's really, I think, a wonderful lunch, healthy, delicious. And we were lucky enough to have real wasabi root. So this is the wasabi, and the way the wasabi is ground, this is shark skin. And so you rub the root on the shark skin and you put it on the food, and it's, oh, wow, it's fabulous. It's really strong and delicious. But you need to do it just before you eat because it won't hold the powerful flavor. And maybe you know this, but if you get sushi with wasabi, it's probably horseradish with green dye. So wasabi is pretty expensive. So chances are, and we actually have a wasabi plant growing, which is a shock. I don't know why it's still alive. It's been more than a year and it's still living. I know it grows in the Pacific Northwest. That's where you can really grow it, but that's the main region that I know of in America where wasabi grows. It needs, I understand it needs clean, slightly moving water, and it's a particular thing, and it doesn't have that with us. So I don't know, we must have a tough one. So I kind of moving towards my conclusion. This is to re-emphasize, I think, the importance of the way designers use pathways, how they use them to take you to the different parts of the garden, and how beautiful they are with moss and textural plants. One aspect of designing a Japanese garden that's different from the way most Western gardens are designed is that they begin with the small details first. So they kind of like a nucleus and they grow out from there. And the gardens I've been involved with, you know, everybody, we get a master plan and we do these big plans and then we focus in. But I like this way. I think it's a good way. It might not work every time, but I love the details. In the end, it's the details that make the difference, I think. So I can't overemphasize view. View is really how we get the most out of our gardens, to live with a beautiful view. And I like this because it reminds me of some of the Roman gardens where you get the, you know, the inside and the viewing from all sides. I've always dreamt of having that kind of garden. And think about negative space. I'm not very good at this concept of negative space, but I really work at it and appreciate it. And so it's to not have this need to fill the spaces up, but to work around the negative spaces. And I'm doing it in painting, and it's not easy in painting either. So keeping that in mind, your garden won't be too busy. It will be simple and it'll be beautiful in its simplicity. And it will be open. I mean, this is enclosed, but the feeling is open. And so I think for me, there's a lot to learn in thinking about negative space, because I particularly love gardens that are peaceful and serene. So this is not a historic garden. This is an inn that we stayed in, but I just noticed how all these hundreds of years they've been dealing with water, and they've been dealing so well with it that they almost never have floods in their structures. So in this case, you know, the water is moving along here, And they build it in, they carry it where they need to carry it. And they've always done that. So, you know, there's a great history of working well with water. So if you want to really delve more into Japanese gardening and Japanese garden design, the best place that I know of in this country is the Portland Japanese Garden. In my opinion, that's the best Japanese garden in America. It's so beautiful, and they have an international training center, and you can learn pruning and all aspects. It's just well worth, you know, I haven't gone to the school, but I know the garden and I know people that work there, and I know I was just blown away when I visited it. And you've been here, a lot of you have been to my garden. It's not Japanese, but it does have a few of the elements that I talked about today. So one is beautiful stonework, making it beautiful year round. And then there are almost no flowers because it really wasn't designed with flowers in mind. And there are layers with, you know, a stream coming down. So you really can't see it, but there are some very pretty views. And I've really learned to not focus the garden on flowers. They're the icing on the cake, but they're not the cake. You know, the cake is really all the other plants. And so with that, that really brings me to the end of my talk, but I would love to answer questions if I can. And I found out today that I think in 2024, American Horticulture Society is going to do a tour to Japan, a garden tour. So if you're interested, you can watch out for that. It's with Ponant. It's actually on a boat, not a huge boat, but it's kind of cool in that it takes you into different docks where you then go off to see the different gardens. So Olivia, you can see if people have questions, see how that wants to work. Okay. Are you there, Olivia? Do
I
need to
am here. I'm sorry. I was a little slow coming off of mute. That was wonderful.
Uh-oh, I think, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Don't let me interrupt.
No, can you handle questions for me if there are any?
I can, and there are some questions. So Brian Broderick wants to know, how do the Japanese feel about using natives versus exotics?
Oh, that's a great question. So it's a really good question. And do you know that most of the plants they use in their gardens are native? And we use them in our gardens, and they're from Japan. And now a lot of them are weeds in my garden. So I'm trying to replace some of mine with natives. But honestly, I don't know the philosophy there about natives, but as I'm thinking, almost all the plants in their gardens are native. So to be further explored, because I'll have to ask the question when I go to Japan, what they're thinking about.
That's wonderful. And so we were talking about the use of negative space in the gardens, which is so important, and how we really need to apply that to our own gardens. That was a really great concept to bring up. I do not see any other questions in the chat, and maybe someone wants to add one, or are there any other questions that people have online? I do see that Alan has his hand raised. Alan, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hello, Holly.
Hi. Is that Alan Hirsch?
It's Alan Hirsch. Yes,
Hi,
it is.
Alan. Oh my God. We go way back. Okay.
Way back. We don't want to think about how far back that goes.
That's right.
But anyway, you're right. Anyway, about 20 years ago, one of my closest colleagues, a scientist in Japan invited me to give a scientific talk there. And he knew, since he'd worked with me in the United States for years, about my connection to gardens. And being typically Japanese, you understand this very well, he decided to throw out like a 50-foot red carpet. He took me all over the place. He took me on the bullet train down to Kyoto. He put me in a mountain inn, and I had to try to eat all those strange foods you were talking about.
Yes.
It wasn't easy, but he took me all over Kyoto. And one of the things he did, I don't recall seeing it in your talk, and if I missed it, I apologize, but he took me to one of the most famous moss gardens, and we had to go in and we had to do this sort of ceremony. I mean, I don't know, like write something that was run by the monks. We had to go in and before we could tour the garden, we had to go into the building and write something. And of course, he had to stand there and sit there and help me because of course I couldn't do this. And I thought that was rather interesting. Are you familiar with that garden?
I know I'm not, and we didn't have to do that. We didn't have to write something when we went into some of these special gardens with the monks. So, but I love that. But they do roll out the red carpet. That is really typical. It's amazing what they do.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. At one point, he was taking me through a garden in Tokyo, and there were these huge Hinoki cypress. I mean, giant. I mean, like 100 feet high, ancient Hinoki cypress. And I was just walking with him, and I said, "Oh, those are Hinoki cypress." And he was astounded that I knew what they were, because apparently that's one of the sacred woods that they use, right, to make
Yes.
religious boxes and stuff. So I thought that was kind of cute.
That's
Anyway,
really,
I'll have to come
I
out.
love
Yeah,
that. And I love your art, Alan. I love following you on Instagram.
Yeah, it's very nice of you. I just today put my art up at the Reston Art Fair. I'm there for the
Yay.
next 3 days.
It's
So
fantastic.
it's a beautiful art fair if people want to come out. Anyway, I'll let other people ask
Thanks.
questions, but it's great talking to you.
Thanks, Alan.
And then we have another question in the chat from Carol Bergman asking if you have any recommendations for Japanese gardens on the East Coast.
Yes, I do. There's a good Japanese garden in Fairmount Park in Philadelphia. It's a good one. I grew up when I was young. I grew up there. I loved that garden, and they've restored it, and it's very good. And then there's another very good one in Florida, in Delray, Florida. It's fabulous. And there's one in, let's see, I want to say Iowa. I think it's Iowa, called the Anderson Garden, which is really good too. That's not the East Coast. And then there's some good ones in Maine, up in Maine at the Rockefeller Gardens. So those are the ones that come to mind. But there is one I can't speak to. I haven't been there recently, but in New York, Brooklyn Botanic Garden, and a lot of the public gardens have them too. So those are the ones that come to mind.
Okay.
Thank you. That was good information. Brian Broderick also mentioned in the chat that all that garnish plant was Xanthosylum piperetum citrus fragrance. Yeah, wonderful minty flavor with a lingering hint.
It is. I love that herb. I use it sometimes, and I did grow the plant at the National Arboretum. They like to get them when they're very young.
Yeah.
We have the American Xanthosylum, and one of my favorite practical jokes is telling people, nibble on these berries.
And their mouth goes numb.
Uh-huh.
Sick.
Yeah. Yes.
Sick.
Are there other questions for Holly? We're so delighted to have you share your expertise in these beautiful visions of glory, and it's just transported us all to another world.
Thank you.
Warren,
Well,
and Warren has asked how you like to prepare your burdock.
oh, good, great question. So it's Osamu, really. Sometimes I say but what I really mean is Osamu, because he's a really good cook, he loves cooking. So he buys burdock at the Korean store. He likes to go to the Korean store because it's cheaper than the Japanese store. So anyway, he gets these long burdock roots and soaks them in water, scrubs them, and I think he usually shaves off a little bit of the outside, and then he soaks it. And then he makes I think it's called kimpura, and he sautés them with carrots. And I know it has in it sesame oil. And then he adds them into soups. Once I checked on the medicinal benefits of gobo. Oh my God, it's expansive, let me tell you. Then he started adding it into a lot more foods. So adding it into soups and stews and sautés, but it can be leathery. And so, you have to get it fresh and soak it and maybe get that outside off. And I had a disagreement with an American herbalist who said, well, I always want to get the Asian burdock because, they have special cultivar and it has nice, long, straight roots, the way they grow it. And she said, no, American burdock is fine. Well, to me, the burdock in America is more weedy. And when I've dug it up, it's just got these big, thick, rough, leathery roots. So I don't know the answer, but I'm sticking with the Asian burdock.
Okay, good tips. Lana Ray has her hand up. Lana and Neil, do y'all have a question?
Well, hi, thanks. I just wanted to say what a joy it was to see the Portland garden. I loved it when I lived there 30 years ago, and I'm delighted to hear it's still doing well. And I wanted to mention that Portland has added a Chinese garden now, so you can see them both, and they're very, very different. So if you go out that way, be sure and do both of them.
Yes, you're right. I went to the Chinese garden and I loved it. Totally immersive experience. And they had a Chinese tea house where the tea and food was fabulous. So I completely agree with you. It's equally wonderful.
So we get to see beautiful gardens, cooking tips, travel tips. I tell you, this is a winner. Thank you so much, Holly, for speaking to us.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
We'll get the recording posted. Bye-bye.